Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic today, a little scary. Let's do it. People who know murderers. Were there any signs that something was off? If so, what were they? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I spent a lot of time at a friend's house when I was like 6 to 9 years old. He had a brother who was like 3 years older than us, who I remember as being generally nice, but I have one weird memory of him absolutely losing his shit when he tried to teach me and his brother to rollerblade and I couldn't get it, like throwing things and weeping uncontrollably. When I was in high school, found out that he had joined the military, and while he was deployed, he got court-martialed for killing civilians and keeping body parts, fingers, and ears as trophies. Knew a girl as a freshman in college who was mean, obviously mentally unstable, and not too bright. When her fraternal twin sister fell in love with a good friend of mine, she became enraged with jealousy and could not let it go. Her sister begged her to get help, and there was a huge blowout in a hallway on campus where my friend had to intervene to prevent his girlfriend from getting stabbed by her sister. The police were called to campus, and she spent a week in jail before her sister decided to not press charges. Her remaining friends dropped out of her life because of her actions and unwillingness to get help. She got kicked out of college shortly after threatening the guidance counselor, who was giving her one last chance, and moved back in with her parents. When her sister went home for Christmas with my friend to introduce him to her parents, I told them to watch his back. They hadn't even made it all the way into the house before they were attacked and repeatedly stabbed. My friend died on the porch, and she died at the hospital the next day. The murderous sister was beaten to death in a jail fight a few days later. I met their older brother, who I didn't even know existed, at the funeral for the good sister. He said he had gone no contact with the family years before for his own protection, because his parents refused to do anything about the mental health problems that his little sister always had, even as a small child. Rest in peace, Derek. Miss you, buddy. I've met several after the fact, but this is about one I met weeks before the murder. My then husband and I were hanging out and met up with a friend of his and the friend's girlfriend. The friend gets a call from his brother and invites him to join us. The brother arrives, and pretty soon afterwards, the whole vibe changed. My ex knew both men since all three were kids, so he relaxed enough to start drinking around them. I was babysitting a wine cooler because I'm the next thing to a teetotaler and was the designated driver. I kept noticing the brother staring at me, but tried to ignore it, but it quickly became very uncomfortable. I'm nothing special to look at facially. I got the mom bod on lock, and I was with my husband. The brother then asks me why I'm not drinking. I explained that I'm not a real drinker, and added that I like to be aware of who and what's around me. So he asked my husband why I wasn't drinking. I don't remember his response, but dude looks at me and says, "We need to get you drunk." I left to go sit in the car because what the F was that? I didn't feel safe or protected because my ex wasn't even paying attention. About 20 minutes later, dude walks up to my car and asks if I can take him to the corner store. I reminded him that he had a car, and he replied that he couldn't drive because he'd been drinking. I told him I wouldn't take him, which led to us staring at each other in silence for several moments. He broke the silence by saying, "I bet you're real loyal, a loyal girl, a good girl. I know that mother effer get anything he want from you." Then he laughed and walked away. When I told my ex the next day, he wasn't bothered and was making excuses for the friend's brother's behavior. A few weeks later, there was a report on the news about the body of a woman being found in my ex's old neighborhood. Find out later, she'd been arred and murdered. It didn't take long to find and arrest her killer, aka the friend's brother. Sounds like a bona fide creep, and obviously your sixth sense was right. It's terrible what happened, but glad you're okay. Bad. I knew someone who killed her mother. No, absolutely no warning at all. No hints to look back on and say we should have seen it coming. She was a perfectly average suburban wife and mother who woke up one day and snapped, and ended up being featured on Snapped. She's currently serving out a 40-year term. My former manager killed his wife and attempted to make it look like a suicide. He did this because he was ultra religious and cheating on his wife with multiple women he found online. The church he was a member of frowned upon divorce, so he thought murder would be a better alternative. The story has been on Dateline and other shows. He was a super strange dude, and when I found out, I wasn't completely surprised. His office always smelled like farts. I know a guy who accidentally killed a guy in a bar fight from choking him out. The guy was drugged out, throwing chairs at people in the bar. The guy I know tried to choke him out to stop his rampage. He is a narcissistic piece of shit and has been since I met him. He has bad temper control issues and crazy tough guy complex. It didn't surprise me when I heard that he had killed someone. Accidentally or not, he is the type to get into situations like that in the first place. A former coworker tried to murder his girlfriend and spent some time in prison for attempted murder. Got out, moved to Florida, and promptly murdered his new girlfriend. Dude was effing red flags up and down, needlessly aggressive over small matters, insanely prideful, and willing to argue about basically any disagreement. None of the women I worked with were comfortable around him, and some straight up called him dangerous and wouldn't be in the same room as him. We worked an office job, and he actually thumped his chest at me with his fist, yelling about seniority. He ate some of the first girlfriend's face while stabbing her in the chest multiple times. She tried to get him to be kept in prison and to warn his new girlfriend, but he dismissed her as crazy and blowing things out of proportion. He cut the second girlfriend's throat because he thought she danced with someone else. Just out of high school, I spent 8 months in Australia, met a family that I became really close to. We hung out a lot, and I worked for him. I liked the wife and kids more than the husband. He was very narcissistic and far too interested in his 13-year-old daughter's friends. He got caught cheating on his wife for the second or third time, and when the marriage was falling apart, described his soon-to-be ex-wife how he could kill her and make it look like an accident. A couple years later, he remarried, got caught cheating by the new wife. She wasn't as forgiving as the first wife, and threatened divorce before she died exactly as he had described how he would kill his ex. She, the ex-wife, called the police, and they re-examined the accident, found the chunk of wood he hit her with before he loaded her in the car and pushed it over a cliff, serving life in prison. Edit. He died of cancer in prison in 2017. I delivered the baby of a 15-year-old girl and her maybe 17 to 18-year-old baby daddy, who I met a few times at prenatal visits. Greasy, but was actually quite polite. The girl behaved like a very young teenager in general. Several weeks later, I got a call from the pediatrician taking care of the child. He told me that the baby was in the hospital with multiple fractures. My first, rather naive reaction was to assume the baby had undiagnosed osteogenesis imperfecta. The pediatrician straightened me out pretty quickly. I don't think there was anything that could have been done for the baby. Pretty sure the baby daddy was convicted. My dad would always tell me about the crazy things his work friends would say. Things like how he was going to push his wife down the stairs or put rat poison in her food. I told my dad that these weren't normal things to say, and he should contact the police, or at least his HR, but he would defend it, saying that was just his sense of humor. He got arrested trying to hire a hitman to kill his wife, which ended up being a cop.
Look, all murder is bad, and none of this is good in any way, shape, or form. But can I just say, as someone who never tried to hire a hitman to kill anyone, would you really trust that? I mean, you gotta think it's a cop. All those times you see on Dateline or some of these shows is always like, and the hitman turned out to be a law enforcement officer. I don't know.
My half-sister conspired with her then-boyfriend to kill her mom, stepdad, and stepbrother. Turned out her stepbrother ended up staying out, and our brother, my half, her full, was there instead, so he was the one who died. I was a little girl when it all happened, and I tried to tell adults around me that she was acting weird at the funeral, but I just got scolded and told everyone grieves differently. She just sat there in her pew saying he wasn't supposed to be there to herself over and over. I even told the dang FBI and basically got a pat on the head. 10 years later, her ex-boyfriend got ratted out by his new girlfriend. My sister got life, but committed suicide in her cell a few years ago. He's still on death row. I grew up in morgues and funeral homes. My grandmother did makeup and hair on corpses, and she'd bring me along to help. She wasn't supposed to, but she did. Some of my earliest memories are painting cheeks with rouge and enjoying the way Aquanet mixed with formaldehyde smelled. So, if I say, hey, that person is acting kinda off at a funeral, they are. Nobody listens to kids, and they really should. My ex-husband and I were together 9 years and had 3 children together. He had his flaws, as everyone does, and there were a few things like lying that were an issue in the beginning, but he was a supportive husband and father and a great employee at a veterinary hospital for 7 years. Clients and animals loved him. When our daughter, youngest child, was a few months old, he started having an affair with a coworker of his. Ultimately, it ended our marriage. She had 2 kids from her previous marriage who were very close in age to 2 of mine. Eventually, my ex and this person got married and had 2 daughters of their own. 4 years ago, he murdered all 5 of them. Whoa. The new wife and 4 kids. Literally, no one in his life could have said they saw anything indicating he would ever do something like that. ETA. He is still alive. Trial ended recently. Jury recommended the death penalty. I actually know a couple, oddly enough. The one worth a mention is a definite yes. He used to hang with us on the streets in my town every day, and I never thought much of him other than he always made me feel creepy. Like, you know when you get caught that feeling about someone and you can't quite describe what it is, but something in your body is screaming at you that this person is not okay. Maybe it was the eyes. I passed it off as anxiety, as I had a problem with that anyways. Also, I was young and didn't fully understand what some people could be down under. The only notable thing I remember is one time he hugged me. It was a bear hug. He picked me up off the ground. He was much bigger than me and squeezed me really hard, crushing my chest. I mean, like, harder than anyone needed to go for it to be a joke. I screamed, and the girl I was with started slapping him to let me go. When he dropped me, he laughed and passed it off as a joke. I had a bruise for weeks. There were many other instances, but as I was not directly involved, I won't mention them. Pretty much well understood by everybody that he was different. He walked into a shop where his ex worked and, without emotion, stabbed her to death. Walked out and got in a taxi home. Seriously, didn't even run. To my knowledge, started playing Xbox all day like it never even happened. The police showed up and arrested him. Told the judge the government had some radar shit on submarines off the coast and that they were using them to get into his head and made him do it. He's in the mental ward now, or whatever the prison equivalent is. That was the first time in my life I learned to always listen to your gut about people and never doubt what your body is trying to tell you about someone. My father's stepsister killed all 3 of her kids and herself with a handgun a few years ago. Was a very sweet and caring woman, had run into financial trouble, and was also dealing with bipolar disorder in herself and one of her sons. The youngest child had just been diagnosed with autism. Things got worse and worse in both financial and mental health situations, until finally she sent a text to her kids' school that they will be absent that day, and a wellness check in the evening found all 4 members of the family dead. No sign ever that she was capable of that sort of violence. Yes, one of my friends was shot and killed by his older brother when we were in 3rd grade. My mom says the most chilling thing she's heard was 8-year-old me saying I wasn't surprised by the news. The kids were a result of the parents, not excusing the older brother's actions, but he had been raised in a different environment or gotten the help he obviously needed, maybe it would have played out different. He had a history of behavioral problems, and it was well known he relentlessly bullied his brothers. He had a history of using violence and threats of violence. Last I knew, he had gotten out of jail in his early 20s with a GED and was more or less a productive member of society, which is good but terrifying. The thing I remember most about the case was older brother showing 0 remorse. It played a big role at the trial. My dad once told me a story. He's passed away since. My dad used to sell insurance, and visits to people's houses were the norm, 1990s. He had to cover an area on the southern end of northeast Ohio, specifically Tuscarawas County. One day, he found himself knocking on the door of a man that was a little off, invited my dad into his home, and they started to small talk. This is in rural Ohio, so needless to say, the topic of guns comes up. My dad was a gun enthusiast and even found some of the things this person was saying a little off-putting. Man offers to show my dad some firearms, so my dad says, sure, why not? Guy proceeded to take my dad to his basement, where he's quite the collection of firearms. This guy comments get slightly more disturbing. This gun to take out a man from over 500 yards away, etc. My dad wraps up the conversation and leaves the guy's house. You can imagine his surprise when he sees this guy's face plastered all over the news in the next months for killing multiple hunters out in the woods and almost hunting them as if it were for sport.
Look, I'm sure selling insurance door to door, even back in the day, was, times a pretty tough racket, but you could make a living doing it. But if somebody invites you into your house, obviously that's where you want to make the point of sale, but they want to show you their gun collection in the basement, you better be ready to move. So, glad your dad got out of there. Ohio.
Guy I worked with confessed to killing somebody one time. Didn't take it seriously till the police picked him up at work. He was eccentric, to say the least. The story behind the murder is crazy and stupid. I can't find the link if anybody's interested. He had a seizure in the back of my car one time. I ended up taking him to his parents after that, who I thought were rude, but turns out were deaf. His room was decorated with holes in the wall. He used to wear makeup. One day, he'd tell me he was gay. Then he'd have a drug-fueled orgy with all women that night. He was always getting into fights and lying about it. He was a strange guy. My coach for a youth sports team shot and killed his neighbor. What did the neighbor do? Fought coach to stop coach from drunkenly beating his wife on his porch. Coach claimed self-defense up until the investigators followed coach's blood trail from his porch to his gun safe to the neighbor's porch and inside the neighbor's house. The case then ceased to be self-defense and turned to premeditated murder. Life in prison. The signs? Dude was a total overconfident prick. The kind of guy that was a stud high school football player and never ever matured past that first team All-State for a small rural school in 1978. Even as kids, we knew this guy was a hot-headed idiot incapable of critical thought.